Welcome to Culturally Determined. I'm your host, Aryeh Cohen-Wade, and my guest today is Ross Barkan. Ross, could you please introduce yourself?
Happy to be here. I'm Ross Barkan. I am a writer, columnist, and a journalist. I write for different publications. I've published a few books. I'm right now a contributing writer to the New York Times Magazine. I also write for New York Magazine, and I do a column with The Nation. And I run a Substack newsletter, rossbarkan.substack.com, where I share a lot of my thoughts on New York and national politics. And I'm very excited to be here to chat.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. So we're first going to be talking about a piece that you wrote a couple weeks ago, and it was on your Substack. MAGA is here to stay, wishful thinking on Tucker and Trump, and the link will be in the show description. So you wrote this after Tucker Carlson's sudden firing from Fox News, but you were reacting also to, I guess, arguments that Greg Sargent of the Washington Post had made, and other people as well, that the MAGA movement or Trump himself or the combination of the two, maybe there's actually no difference, is running out of steam, and you disagreed with that. So why do you think MAGA is here to stay?
I think anyone who thinks MAGA is on the decline or waning or dissipating is engaging in wishful thinking at best, or myopia at worst. MAGA controls a major political party in the United States. We only have two of them that matter. And one of them, which has a pretty good chance to take the Senate next year and the presidency as well, is effectively controlled by, for lack of a better word, the MAGA movement, by Trumpism, whatever you want to call it. And I think there's this idea that because candidates supported by Trump lose in races, oh, Trump must be weaker. I look at the Republican primary right now. It's Trump is winning by a lot if you pay attention to the polls, and should win by a lot, barring honestly a health setback or death. I don't think that the legal implications matter much for him in the Republican primary. And he's quite strong, and he's quite popular in the Republican Party. And even those Republicans who maybe at first don't like him or go against him at times, ultimately they fold in. And you see this again and again. The leader of the Republican Senate campaign committee endorsed Trump for president again. And I think that tells you all you need to know from the establishment on down. Trumpism is in the party. The head of the RNC is a close ally of Trump, and on it goes. So I don't buy the counter arguments, though I understand where they come from.
Yeah, I mean, Trump has always been both strong within the party, but there's, he, like, in 2016, he never really won a majority in the primaries. It was a split field, and he was able to get like 35 to 45% continually and win that way. So, and there's definitely more of a anti-Trump faction within the party than there's like an anti-Biden faction within the Democratic Party. That being said, counting him
I
out
don't know.
is always
I think the anti-Trump faction in the Republican Party is partially immediate creation. I don't know if one truly exists. I mean, there are people running around like Asa Hutchinson who are Trump skeptical. Nikki Haley in theory is Trump skeptical, but she worked for him. I don't see it. I don't see, if you're talking about the Republican Party, there are certainly factions in terms of those who care more about, economic and fiscal conservatism versus those who maybe are more vaguely populist versus those who are isolationist in foreign policy versus those who are very neocon interventionist. Like, I think those factions exist, but I mean, an anti-Trump faction in the Republican Party, I don't know what evidence there is that there's a large contingent of voters who are effectively against him. Now, DeSantis has a lot of support, but it's not like these voters wouldn't also vote for Trump too. I mean, some of them are sick of Trump. I mean, Trump's been running a lot. He hasn't won. He is crazy. So no doubt there's fatigue, but I don't really, I don't see a sizable anti-Trump faction in the Republican Party, put it that way.
Mhm. One thing I can't decide or is whether, I mean, is the MAGA movement separate from just Trump as a sort of cult of personality? Like, if Trump dropped dead tomorrow, would the MAGA movement go on? Like, Don Jr. is not going to lead it. um, DeSantis was sort of pitching himself as like a sane version of Trump or a smarter, less a Trump who could get things done, but pursued similar policies. But Trump doesn't have a coherent ideology. And if he turned on a dime about any particular policy issue, I assume most of his the 70 or to 90 or whatever percent of the GOP who likes him would just go along with it. So is there an actual MAGA movement that's not just Trump and Trump does whatever he wants based on his whims?
I think we will find out. That's the cop out answer is that one day Trump will die and we'll know. Now, I think on one hand, no, in that it is partially or fully, depending on your view, a cult of personality. It is built around him and his urges and his whims and his ideas. On the other hand, there is a I would call it a thinly sketched philosophy of MAGA, which is very nativist, fairly isolationist. Though again, I think the isolationism can vary depending on if China is brought up, and then those who are very isolationist on Ukraine will suddenly sound like hawks on China. But I do think you have that element there. And there is more tolerance for, I would say, fiscal populism in MAGA than in the traditional wing of the party. I'm thinking of kind of Reaganites, or even if you look at Mitt Romney's 2012 campaign, it was a very fiscally conservative campaign. I don't, Romney himself, you can talk about him, but just looking at the campaign he ran, Trump did not run such a fiscally conservative campaign. No, as president, he was a conventional Republican in that sense, in terms of tax cuts. But
Hmm.
I do think there is this sort of thinly sketched MAGA view that will outlast him. The Republican Party is anti-immigrant. It's going to continue to be. I think Trump gave voice to Republicans who are tired of the neoconservative and sort of internationalist foreign policy. I think that's going to continue, right? The economic element, I think I'm a little skeptical that, any Republican is really not going to support slashing the social safety net if they have, all the reins of power. But it is notable right now, Trump is running in 2024 on protecting Social Security and Medicare. You can take that with a grain of salt. That is currently his campaign in the primary. He's attacking DeSantis for not doing this when he
Hmm.
was in Congress.
Yeah, I mean, Trump's lack of ideology meant that he could discard the unpopular ideological aspects of movement conservatism, like cutting entitlements and stuff, and because he doesn't really care either way. Um, but and he's DeSantis, I guess, campaigned on cutting Social Security at some point. But sort of like I don't know, the phoniness of it all is the people who are like MAGA Nation. Like these are just the Tea Party people, more or less. They were more or less happy with George W. Bush's compassionate conservatism. Like it's all sort of the same thing. And or it's not like these people are had some like radical like ideological shift. It's just like angry conservatives who are mad, whose anger gets channeled at various targets, I think. Um, so Trump can say, I'll protect your social security. And whereas, DeSantis was on the record wanting to cut or privatize or whatever 10 or 15 years ago, that's good for Trump because the vast American public likes social security. Um, when Trump was in power, he just passed Paul Ryan's tax cut, and most of his domestic policy was the same as what a Ted Cruz or something would have done. So a lot of it
Yeah.
was in the rhetoric and the emotionalism and the showmanship and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think Trump, in many ways, was a conventional Republican office. Certainly, in his judicial appointments, it was no different than what a Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz would have done in terms of appointing Gorsuch, in terms of Amy Coney Barrett. These were judges who any conventional Republican would have nominated. I would say if there was a divergence of policy between Trump and the conventional Republican, I saw it in the initial response to the pandemic with the CARES Act, which was, trillions of dollars in government spending. Trump, in a way, the Trump alignment with the Democratic House was kind of this perfect storm to, suddenly plow a lot of money into the economy at a time when the economy was teetering on ruin when COVID first arrived. So that was interesting. I think the CARES Act was interesting to me in terms of, I don't know if President Ted Cruz is signing off on that. I think he's more of an ideologue on this fiscal
Hmm.
stuff, where Trump is flexible, where if the opportunity is there, I always joked that the true true way Trump could own the libs is to come out in support of universal health care. And he's someone who I think in the past, like way back when in like the 90s, it would say vague things about how it's a good idea. But of course, he's not going to go there. And, I think Trump himself, is a pretender and a phony. And we know that, a liar. And I don't think he cares that much of anything but himself and power and survival. But I do think it's interesting. We'll see what happens when eventually he leaves the scene. Does this policy realignment that he either inadvertently caused or, maybe actively thought about it and caused, does that continue in the Republican Party, or does it default to what it was in the Bush years, right? A religiously very conservative party that was fiscally conservative and very supportive of international adventures
Hmm.
and funding the military to go fight wars, and is that just what the Republican Party will eventually revert to? It's possible. I don't know, but I think it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that initial rescue plan in that first stage of the pandemic was like passed on a voice vote in Congress. I mean, most of the representatives were not there because of the lockdown. So if Hillary Clinton had been president, probably Ted Cruz or someone like him would have objected to an identical rescue package. Just
No, definitely. I think Trump was able to get Republicans to support. I'm trying to remember how big the CARES Act was. It 2 trillion.
Yeah, it was sort of
I
insane.
forget
And they also
forget the
they
number.
suspended the debt ceiling indefinitely. That was one of the just to show how bullshit that whole
Yes,
thing is. Like,
the
it
checks
was a true
going out.
emergency, and everything
Yes,
just
and
yeah.
and I'm a defender of the carrot. Both conservatives and I would say not so much progressives, but definitely left pundits have criticized the CARES Act, and certainly there's a lot of waste in it, and there was fraud in it. That's inarguable, but as a policy response in the throes of this unknown crisis, it was pretty successful in that it kept the economy from entering a new Great Depression. So
Hmm.
I look back on March 2020 and the policy making in that era and go, you know what? This was actually an example of the American system working for once, not to contain COVID, we know that, but to save the economy. And you look at, in general, the American stimulus, even globally was pretty large. And I think, it's a reason why today we struggle with inflation, but unemployment is low and things hum on. It's not dire by any means. And it's really nothing like the aftermath of the 2008 crash, which
Hmm.
was a malaise that lasted almost a decade and helped elect Trump.
Right, right. And as to whether once Trump eventually does pass from the scene, his sort of populist instinct, or at least not caring about deficits or whatever, will continue on. I mean, it seems like the people who run economic policy in the GOP are people who want low taxes, less government regulation, and that's about it. That's what they care about the most. So that will probably, I think, revert. Once the
Yeah.
craziness of Trump. And I mean, Trump passed a huge tax cut, so those people got what
Yes.
they wanted.
No, I don't bet against the plutocrats for a second. I do think the left, or or certain people on the left do discount some of the Republicans. I'd say Hawley and Vance, I think on one hand, are looking to be successors in this MAGA movement. I mean, how serious they are about, I would say, economic populism. I think the jury is very much out on that, and wouldn't shock me if again they revert to standard issue Republicans on taxes and spending once Trump's out of the picture. But someone like Hawley taking interest in antitrust. I think the antitrust movement is one of those things now that he's attracting some bipartisan support. Does that continue or does that fizzle? I think I can't answer that, but there are various voices in the Trump wing vying for influence and for sort of agenda setting. Where that goes, I don't know.
So Trump has been indicted, and it seems likely is going to be indicted one or two more times this year. And he also may be held liable in a civil sense for rape in this case that just, I think, went to the jury today. Um, and there's some chance that on election day 2024 he will be in jail. Like, that seems insane, but that could happen. Do you think any of this will affect Trump's standing within the party or the MAGA movement, like their
Not,
takeover?
not within the party. I think certainly Trump as a general election candidate is very flawed. I mean, this general election, assuming it's Biden Trump, is really going to be this war of attrition between an incumbent president who to most ordinary people seems too old to be president, and Donald Trump, who is unhinged, and he's Donald Trump, right? And he
Right.
comes with so much baggage from trying to overturn an election to being a serial liar to being indicted. All these things will add up in a general election context. And I don't want to, I think you can get too cynical and say, well, look, he's rising in the GOP primary. It's true. But, come, October, November 24, certainly, and this is one of those elections that, like the last ones, are going to hinge in a few states on a few factors. Clinton Trump in 2016 probably broke on Comey. Uh, you know, 2020 could have broken for Trump too, if a few states had gone differently. So it's going to be like that again. So I certainly think Trump himself is not invulnerable by any means. But in the Republican primary, I don't think these indictments matter. I do think that liberals have to accept that the Manhattan indictment is not that strong, and it's very unlikely Trump is going to spend time in jail, based on my understanding of the Alvin Bragg case. You're talking about a campaign finance violation. Now, the other indictments, right, a different story, and I haven't studied them well enough, and I don't want to really weigh in or speculate. But you have a case against him in Manhattan that, in best case scenario, he could possibly do jail time, but it seems unlikely. So already, if you're viewing it through a purely political lens, it is a win for Trump that he gets to be a martyr, in a case that is not certainly the smoking gun that a lot in the left hoped it would be.
Mhm.
Now, the other cases could be different, and of course, the legal problems you saw with Clinton in 2016 can dog you. And so I don't underestimate Trump struggling with this in August and September of next year at all. But in terms of the primary, he's here to stay. I don't see a scenario where he doesn't win the nomination again, barring health. That's what it comes down to. To me, it's not anything legal. It's literally his elderly frame gives out, which
Well,
it happens to all of us.
yeah,
But
I
other than
mean,
that,
you
I think he'll
mentioned
be
Biden's
fine.
Biden's age. He's 80.
Yeah, it's a
Trump is
major
only
issue.
3 years younger, and
Well,
Trump.
he's five. Yeah, he's born 46. Or no, 4 years. 4 years. Biden's born 42. They're 4 years apart.
Okay, maybe it's closer to 3.5.
Yeah.
They're not that much older, and
Yeah.
Trump himself was the oldest elected president when he was elected in
Yes.
2016. And Trump has, I mean, even in 2020, it was noticeable that Trump was not as sharp as he was 4 years earlier. If you watch the Clinton Trump debates, Trump is much more on the ball and is like more cracking jokes and like dissing Clinton than he did in the Biden debates, where if people remember his in the first one, he was just like yelling and interrupting all the time. I guess that was a purposeful strategy. But anyway, in 2024, he will be 8 years past what he was in 2016, and he already was crazy and is even more surrounded by sycophants and in his own little world than than he was before. So I think, like, obviously Biden is not as sharp as he used to be, but Trump is as well. And if I don't know, I assume there will be GOP debates. I think Trump said something like he might not show up, but that seems like bullshit to me because he loves being on television. But I do wonder if that could somehow change the dynamic. Um, if because I don't know, he just isn't as sharp and with it and like funny and clever as he once was. So
I
I
don't
think
know. I
that
think I
that
think
still is a
his
wild card.
I think his rallies are still very Trump. Well, I don't see a difference in watching his rally performances, I guess, recently than him in 2016. He seems like the same character, you
He
know.
seems I mean,
Uh
I haven't seen more than a handful of clips that circulate, which are probably
yeah,
the more insane ones. He seems more
yeah.
insane than he was before, or more rambling, or whatever. Like, he's not getting any better.
No, he's
And
not.
a year from now,
He
he's going to be a little
his
bit worse, probably.
it's plausible. No, I mean, it's definitely plausible. I don't want to, say Trump will cognitively improve because he won't. I think
Right.
Trump and Biden are interesting where it's aesthetically at least, the styles are someone who, appears very aggressive and loud and unhinged and kind of an insult comic and getting facts wrong, but also entertaining versus Biden today, who is slower, just in terms of speech than he used to be and does misspeak more. And people have attributed that to stuttering. I think that's insulting to people who stutter. I know people who stutter and they don't get facts wrong in the public domain like Biden does. Like thinking, saying multiple times that um, Bo died in Iraq, which I do think, I hate to say it, but I do think if you were a Republican president, the left leaning media would have shredded him for that. But, like I said, these things can all cancel out, and that, yes, Trump is who he is. He is incendiary. He is someone who is going to have a cap on his support. I don't think he's someone who can grow his support necessarily. And then Biden, who will be turning 82 shortly after the election, and is fit physically, but he's not the Biden he used to be. He's not the Biden of like 2012 debates. He's not the
Mhm.
Biden of '08. I mean, that's obvious to most
Yeah.
people. So how that shakes out, I don't know. Again, it's just going to be another highly polarized election that comes down to Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, and that's pretty much it, right? So, what issues will hang over the race? I don't know.
There also was this dynamic, and maybe primary debates don't really matter, like no one really watches them, and certainly everyone in America's opinion about Trump is pretty set in stone at this point. But there was this dynamic in the 2016 GOP primary where everyone thought Trump would eventually self-destruct or just withdraw, the whole thing was a joke, or they were waiting for someone else to really take him down. And instead, so like Chris Christie took down Marco Rubio, and like they now it's clear, like, if anyone else in the GOP wants to be the nominee next year, they have to go after Trump. And everyone attacking him, for 90 minutes, that's not a dynamic that happened before. So that could be different. But who knows? He's a talented performer and, yeah, like a Borscht Belt insult
Now, aren't there going
comedian.
to be
So who knows
debate?
what'll happen.
Trump could skip the debates. I mean, I just don't know if they're going how those debates will go and if he'll do that. I mean, that's I genuinely don't know. I mean, Trump did skip out on a debate with Biden. So, again, he is very unreliable and you don't know what he's going to do. So
That's true, but
will
I
those
think
debates,
he likes getting attention, and he likes being on
yeah, no, he
TV. So he'll
does. He
probably, and just the
does.
whole will he or won't he show up thing, he did
It's
that
its own
before.
story.
Yeah, so and that
Yes.
so I think he can't skip every single one. Although who knows? He does what he wants. I would guess though that he is going to show up,
Yeah.
and it will be it's more unpredictable than I think. Like it's not just going to be Trump like giving people derisive nicknames and them carrying away, because like we saw what happened before, and
Right.
most of these people are intelligent enough to realize they need a different strategy. Um,
Right.
yeah. Okay, I want to at least briefly mention or talk about another piece that you wrote. Um,
Sure.
the tragedy of Jordan Neely. This is also on your Substack. Probably most people have heard about this or seen the disturbing video. A mentally unwell homeless man who was killed by a subway passenger who was ostensibly just trying to restrain him. And the man who killed him has not been arrested yet. Actually, why do you think that that's the case? Why the NYPD seems like they can arrest or at least detain anyone if they want to, and they don't get in trouble for that? Why is this guy Penny not been arrested?
It's a good question. I don't know exactly why. I mean, look, I think there's certainly a lot we don't know about what happened. We have video, there's gaps in time. Um, you know, we don't have a complete picture, but we do know, you know, there certainly for most people there'd be enough to at least be taken down to a police station. So I can't say why. Certainly the district attorney's office in Manhattan needs to wait on that. I think it will happen soon. I mean, again, perhaps the NYPD is showing deference to Penny and Baby because because either he's white or he's a Marine veteran. I mean, I don't know for sure. My guess is he will get arrested at some point. But again, we don't know all the facts yet. So I think we'll have more clarity on that, I hope, soon.
But NYPD has arrested people without all the facts being known before in the past.
Yes.
It's there is something strange about it. I mean, it seems like you could charge him with various things that are short of murder that he may likely be guilty of. Okay, but then you wrote about both like the way the left and the right are reacting to this, and there's been a lot of it. Really, I don't know. I think you know Twitter has gotten worse since Musk took over, and there's some sort of free floating bloodlust on right wing Twitter that um, is getting expressed when a horrible incident like this happens. But you called out the left or sort of like the defund the police, abolish prison type, which I think was had its moment, but was always pretty marginal and never really accomplished anything. But like there's some people who need to be arrested, and who else is going to do that aside from a police officer? But I'm summarizing your argument. What do you? I mean,
Yeah.
what do you think about this?
So this is one of those incidents that really I think it exposes the hollowness of a lot of people's politics. And I criticized conservatives pretty extensively in my piece, the law on order, the law and order conservative who suddenly is cheering on a vigilante and hopes the vigilante doesn't get arrested. And the same people who quote unquote back the blue, but then like when, civilians go out and hurt people. But here, the civilian was hurting someone who they don't like or they view as like the perceived enemy. So it's okay. I think similarly on the left, you have people who supported defunding or abolishing the police, defunding or abolishing prisons, and really objected for a long time, or at least rhetorically, to the idea of arresting and prosecuting and incarcerating. But if the person is a perceived enemy or has done something that goes against them or their movement, they are happy to call for a swift arrest, a swift prosecution, a swift incarceration, right? Obviously, with defund the police, there are many different types of people in the movement, everyone from reformists to anarchists to those who simply want to move funding around, to those who want to end policing. And I do think that at least some people in the fund have to stop using the cop out of, well, we don't mean abolish. I mean, if you go back to 2020, a lot of the rhetoric was defund to abolish. Defunding is on the road to abolition. And even if you talk to elected officials like Tiffany Caban, the DSA member of the city council in Queens, she would say, I want to defund on the road to abolition. My goal is abolition. I think that's a fine goal. I think you just have to acknowledge that you need a framework for arresting, indicting, and prosecuting, because that's not going anywhere. Jury selection, that we will need some sort of place to hold people. You will need paid professionals to do these things. And I do think the left gets very naive about that. But the right is not any better. And I think the bloodlust, as you say, which I would agree, was really disturbing.
Yeah, I think, defund, abolish prisons. I think this is like such a bad cul-de-sac for the left to go down. I did an episode a couple months ago with Raina Lipsitz, who wrote a book about like the new left, and I made this case, but it's there's no society on earth that doesn't have some form of police and prisons. And the special thing about America is everyone has a gun. So you could have cops in Japan or Britain who just have nightsticks, but anything that is like a police officer in America, they're going to have a gun because guns are so easy to get. And criminals and non-criminals like can have a gun, get a gun, have a gun on them very easily. So that is the root. The guns are the root of a lot of these issues. But yeah, pointing out the hypocrisy um of back the blue type, supporting vigilantism or taking the law into your own hands. I sort of darkly joked on Twitter that this was a sign that people are realizing Biden's going to win re-election, and the state isn't going to kill people that conservatives don't like, so they're going to have to start doing it themselves. But it's just, I don't know. It's the right reaction was more ugly than I would have expected, and yeah, I don't know. So
Didn't surprise me, I would say. I mean, you have going back decades, I think I thought of the Bernard Goetz subway shooting of
mhm,
1984, and this definitely had echoes of that, where Goetz was cheered on by a large segment of the New York City population. If you want to go back further to the killing of Harvey Milk and George Moscone, who's kind of forgotten now, was a fascinating figure. Was the very progressive mayor of San Francisco, and of course, that assassination paved the way for the rise of Dianne Feinstein, and she becomes mayor when he and Milk are killed.
mhm,
But the ex police officer and uh, board of supervisor who killed them was cheered on by the police unions and by the law and order types. He was exacting. The it was the definition of a vigilante. Murder. Someone taking the law into their own hands to do something that they believed was just, but was evil. So it's an old current, but it is one that fails to survive any kind of logical scrutiny or rigor. But again, as I wrote in my piece, I would say most people, a lot of people engaged in politics don't want want they want law and order, but they only want law and order for their enemies, right?
mhm,
They proclaim, whether it's a conservative who wants it. Well, they want it for the people they don't like. But if it's Donald Trump, if it's a Marine strangling a black homeless person, then the law must go easy, right? Then it's okay Trump isn't arrested. It's okay that Penny has yet to be arrested, right? Then discretion is fine. And similarly, you have people on the left who decry the carceral state, who hate the concept of law and order, let's say, or think prosecutors are, not just need to be defunded, but the prosecution itself is inherently an invalid concept. And there are people who were saying that in 2020, right? These people will turn on a dime and start calling for law and order if, again, their perceived enemy is the one in the crosshairs. Then it is lock up Trump. It is lock up Daniel Penny. And I do think you see across ideological lines this lack of rigor, this lack of consistency. And that's unfortunately been with us for a long time. It'll stay with us because I do think people in the heat of politics don't often think issues through.
Yeah, there's definitely, a core tribalism that overrides most. Like, yeah, it's just I want my enemies punished. That's turned out to be a lot of American politics, and ideology goes out the window, as does, like, belief in due process or whatever. When after this, the killing happened, there were out. Yeah, you mentioned Bernie Getz. I was just Googling stuff about Bernie Getz and saw a New York Post headline from when there was just a sketch of the subway quote vigilante, and the cover of the post says post appeals, turn yourself in, appealing to the vigilante himself. So that does seem a little bit different. Even like 30 or 40 years ago, I guess closer to 40, it would be like, obviously there were people who supported Getz. There was like a Getz for mayor grassroots campaign or something, but it was still like you have to turn yourself in and have like justice rendered. Whereas now it seems sort of like, oh, this is great, and he still hasn't been arrested. So yeah, so
Right.
things are getting worse.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's you've probably seen a backsliding on that front. It's all fascinating. Even views on federal law enforcement, the CIA and FBI. You've seen almost a total flip in terms of how the rank and file member of each party views those institutions. Where for many decades it was the left with deep skepticism of the CIA and
Hmm.
the FBI, and kind of believing rightfully so that they existed in part to prosecute people they perceived as their enemies and chase leftists and progressives. And now, given Trump's hostilities, the FBI and the CIA, many on the left now champion it suddenly and decry the fact that he would attack these institutions. And of course, Trump is not doing it because the FBI was was vicious to Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights movement. He's doing it because he wants to protect himself. So there are very few people in politics who have consistent ideological convictions that can be that hold up to logic, put it that way. And that's unfortunately, I think, always going to be the case.
Yeah, and I just was Googling again, and the Post found Getz and got him on the record about Penny, and the
Right.
quote is, "quote
Yes.
he got to pay." So if you can't even have the original guy on your side, then that's something. Okay, why don't we end things there? So if people want to follow your work, where would you direct them?
I would say you can go to my Substack. That's the easiest. It's Ross Barkan, Ross, Barkn .substack.com. I publish there every week. And you can also read me in the New York Times Magazine and New York Magazine and Creams and other publications too, but definitely subscribe to my Substack.
Okay, and the link to your Substack will be in the show notes. So thank you for coming on. Thanks to all of the listeners out there. If you're listening and enjoyed this content, you can rate and review, smash that subscribe button, whatever, you know what to do. Okay, Ross, thank you again, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.